All right, in this section we're going to talk about solving quadratic equations using the quadratic formula. And we are going to look at this. You would use this normally when you can't factor, because most people, once they learn to factor, feel that that's easier. But you can use it on any quadratic. Now, some quadratics are going to come out with an imaginary solution. Some are going to come out with one solution. Some are going to come out with two solutions, and some of them will be fractions or decimals or something that's a non-integer answer. So I want to talk about that a little bit first. So there's not really room on this page, so I'm going to go to a blank page, and I want to talk about the results of the quadratic formula. So I'm going to go back here to where I have a blank page. Now you will need to do this somewhere on your notes, but the discriminant of a quadratic formula or of a quadratic equation is that part that's under the radical. So the b squared minus 4ac, that piece that's under the radical, you call that the discriminant. And if you look at that and only that, and sometimes questions on standardized tests will refer to the discriminant and ask you about what that tells you. And so this is what I want you to know about the discriminant. Remember, I told you quadratics could have one solution where they just touch the x-axis, and that might be, over here on the left side. It could be facing down. But anyway, it touches the x-axis in one spot. Wherever it is, it touches in one spot. This is one solution. That's an example, two examples actually, of graphs, quadratic graphs that would have one solution. The discriminant, if you were working this with the quadratic formula, the discriminant, I'm going to put discrim, will equal 0. So what that means is your b squared minus 4ac is equal to 0. So under that radical, you're going to have a square, you're going to have nothing. That'll all come out to be 0. If you have two solutions, so if you go over and you have the kind of graph where you cross the x-axis in two places, so you have two solutions, then your discriminant is going to be positive, but it's going to just be a number. So your discriminant, excuse me. Well, first of all, I'm going to say this is two solutions. Okay, and your discriminant is greater than 0. Okay, so it's going to have a positive number. So under here, where you have your b squared minus 4ac, is going to be something greater than 0, some number. Okay. Now, if it's a negative number under that discriminant, that's the kind of graph, remember, that doesn't touch. And if you remember, that was a no solution. There's no real solution, and we haven't learned complex numbers yet. So it's possible. So the discriminant under the radical, the discriminant is less than 0, or it's negative. Okay? So your b squared minus 4ac is going to be a negative some number. We'll put a c for some number. but it's negative. And let's kind of do that over here so we have the same notation. Let me just erase this. Your b squared minus 4ac is going to be equal to a number, but it will be positive. It will not be negative. Okay, so it's just a number. So you have two choices. You have three choices. It can be 0, it can be a positive number or a negative number. And that tells you what the graph, how many solutions you're going to have. So if you want to do a quick check, that's one way to do it. Again, throw the graph up on your calculator and you can see what you've got. So let's go back to our notes and talk about the quadratic formula. A squared plus bx, ax squared plus bx plus c is a quadratic equation. And so we have discovered that we can solve these, and we'll talk about that a little bit when I get back, but we can solve these with negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. And a, b, and c being the numbers or the constants from this quadratic formula. So if I was going to mark a, b, and c, this number in front of the x squared is your a, and it shows up here and here in the quadratic formula. B, okay, is this number right here, and b shows up in a couple places. And then c is this number, and it's only in the one place in the formula. So that's where you put those numbers, and it's just a substitution, and that gives you the solution, that gives you the value that x is. So again, ever since 5.3 we've been solving. So that's what we're doing. We're solving using the quadratic formula. So the first step is going to be to move everything over and have it equal 0, just like we did in 5.3 and 5.4. So we're going to subtract 4x here and subtract 4x here. And remember, we always put them in the order x squared, then our x, then our constant. So we have x squared minus 4x minus 12 equals 0. Now, it helps sometimes to write what is a, what is b, what is c. A, in this case, is 1, b is negative 4, and c is negative 12. That's the number in front of the x squared, the x, and then the constant. So our quadratic formula, and you need to remember this. And if you've forgotten, probably in junior high, you learned that this, you can memorize this to Pop Goes the Weasel. And everybody goes, oh no, but it does help you remember it. And so think about that. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. See, it helps you remember it. So hopefully you don't have to hear that again. But anyway, it does help you memorize that formula. So we have x equals negative b. So it's negative, and b is a negative 4. So that's going to end up being positive. So x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is negative 4 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 1, and c, which is negative 12. And I'm running out of room. Okay, 4 times 1 times negative 12, all over 2 times 1. All right, so what does that look like without all those extra negatives? So we have x equals positive 4 plus or minus the square root. Now remember, this first number is always going to be positive. So if you punch it in your calculator and you get a negative number, it's going to give you, you remember it's not negative. It's going to be, this is going to be 16. When you have that negative, if you punch it in like this in your calculator, it's going to tell you it's negative 16. You have to put it in parentheses for it to also square the negative. So you have to kind of be careful on your calculator entry. This can give you a bad answer, and students sometimes just believe their calculator instead of thinking and using their brain. Know that when you square that negative number, it's positive. So that's always the first term. First one here is always going to be positive. So we have 16 minus, well, but we have a negative 4 times a negative 12, so that's going to be plus 48. And that's all over 2. 2 times 1. All right, so now go down some more. We have x equals 4 plus or minus the square root. 8 and 6 is 14. 4, so that's 64. Square root of 64 over 2. Okay. Now there's a number under the radical, so that means I'm going to have two solutions. If it was negative or if it was 0, it'd be different, but I'm going to have two answers to this. And so we have x equals 4 plus 8 over 2, which is square root of 64 is 8, and we put the plus, so that's 8 plus 4 is 12 divided by 2, that's 6. And our other solution is, since it's plus or minus, it'll be 4 minus 8 over 2, which is negative 4 over 2, or negative 2. Okay? So our two answers that we put over here in the solution are 6 and negative 2. Okay, so that's how you go about solving the quadratic formula. We've got some more examples, of course. All right, so looking at this, A, now we have a number in front. A is 5, B is negative 4, and C is negative 2. Okay, so x equals negative 4, negative b, plus or minus the square root. B squared is negative 4 squared, minus 4 times 5 times negative 2, 4ac, all of that over 2a, so that's 2 times 5. Okay. So we have x equals 4 plus or minus 16. Okay, then we have two negatives. We have a negative 4 and a negative 2, so that second piece is going to be plus. 4 times 5 is 20, times 2 would be 40. And then over 10. So that gives us 4 plus or minus the square root of 56 over 10. Well, I can't take a nice even square root of that 56. So let's do our prime factorization. We're going to have to simplify under the radical, like we had some practice doing in 5-4. So that'll be 228, and that'll be 2 and 14. And 14 is 2 times 7, so that's, we can write it, but we know that's not going to, we can't square root that. So we have this group of 2, square root of that group is 2. So this comes out in front of our radical. So we have 4 plus or minus the square 2 times the square root of 14. The 2 times 7 stays underneath, all over 10. Now we need to reduce the fraction. Okay, so when we reduce it, and again we have, with all this is x equals, we have x equals, we divide everything by 2, so that's going to be 2 plus the square root of 14 over 5. We divided this by 2 and got 5, this by 2 and got 2, and all of this by 2, and that 2 becomes 1. And then our other answer is 2 minus the square root of 14 over 5. Okay, and those are our answers. We can't simplify them anymore. They're not real pretty and nice even answers, but that's the answer we get when we solve this quadratic. And that's what I mean by it's not factorable. The other one would have been factorable. When you come out with nice even answers, you could have factored it, but this one you could not have because there's... Now, I'm sorry I was interrupted, but all that being said, when you write your solution, you can write it like this. You can write 2 plus or minus the square root of 14, all of that over 5. So you can just write it as one fraction rather than as 2. Okay. Now if we go on to our next problem, on this one we've got to move some things over. We've got to subtract the 4x and add the 1. And then minus 4x plus 1 on both sides. So you end up with 2x squared minus 4x plus 1 equals 0. And then you figure out your a. So a is 2 and b is negative 4 and c is 1. Alright, so now we're going to put it in our equation. X equals negative b, negative 4, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so that's going to be 16 minus 4 times a times c. Okay, all of that over 2 times a. So a is 2, so 2 times 2. Okay, so x equals 4 plus or minus the square root of 16 minus 8, all of that over 4. Now 8, we simplified that a couple times on our last worksheet, but again, 8 is the same as 4 times 2. So the square root of 8 simplified is you bring the square root of 4 out, and that's 2. That comes out front, and you're left with the square root of 2 that you couldn't do anything with. So this numerator then is going to simplify. So we're going to have, let's write this in. We have 4 plus or minus the square root of 8 over 4. Okay. Then you have 4 plus or minus 2 times the square root of 2 divided by 4. Now I need to reduce this fraction. I can divide the 4 here by the 4, the first term in the numerator, but the second has no 4, it's got a 2. So that would reduce, 2/4 would actually reduce to be 1/2. So the only thing I can divide everything by is 2. So that means I'm going to divide the 4 by 2 and get 2, divide this 4 by 2 and get 2, divide this 2 by 2 and I'll get 1. So I've divided everything by 2. And inside the radical, that's not affected because I divide, that's all one term. And when I divide by 2, I divide it by the number in front. And so now we have 2 plus or minus the square root of 2 over 2. And that's your final answer. That's what you're going to write up in your solution box. So you're going to have 2 plus or minus the square root of 2, all of that over 2. Alright, problem 4. in our homework. We've got to move the 2 over. So we end up with 4x squared plus 5x minus 2 equals 0. And so A is 4, B is 5, and C is negative 2. So x equals 4, or negative 4, never mind, B, negative B, so that's negative 5, plus or minus the square root, B squared is 25, minus 4 times A, which is 4, times C, which is negative 2, all of that over 2A, so 2 times 4. Since I don't have a lot of room, I'm going to continue on here. So that's going to be 5 plus or minus square root of 25 plus, because there's two negatives, there's a negative 4 and a negative 2. So that's 4 times 4 is 16. 16 times 2 would be 32. And all of that is over 8. Now we add what's under the radical, and so you have x equals, and that should be negative 5. I didn't bring that negative. Should be negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 57 over 8. Now, look at that. 57 will divide by 3. 7 and 5 add to be 12. So let's see what happens. We divide this by 3 and we get 19. 19 is a prime number. And so I can't divide this anymore. Well, I don't have a pair. I just have 1 3 and 1 9. So that means I can't do anything with what's under the radical, this 57. So my final answer is going to be negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 57 over 8. And that's the final answer. So it's possible you're going to get these and you can't change anything. You just have to write that as your answer. All right, now our last problem. We have a lot of things to do here. We have to combine the x squareds. There's 2 sets of x squareds, 2 sets of x's. So we're going to add like terms. Well, we want our x squareds to be positive. So I'm going to subtract this x squared and add this 8x and add the 25. So we'll do the same thing on this side. Subtract x squared, add the 8x, and add 25. Okay, we're going to bring down our equal sign. All of this on the right side is 0. And now we have to add what's on the left. 2x squared minus x squared is x squared. 4x and 8x is 12x. And then we have plus 25. So if you have a lot of different things like that, you just combine like terms and go from there. So A is 1, B is 12, and C is 25. Okay. So, putting it in the quadratic formula, x equals negative b, so that's negative 12, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so that's 12 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is 25. All of that over 2 times a. Okay, so what do we have then? We have negative 12 plus or minus the square root of 144 minus 100. All of that over 2. Okay. So now, going to the next step, we have negative 12 plus or minus the square root of 44 over 2. 144 minus 100 is 44. So 44 is the same as 4 times 11. So when I simplify under the radical there, I can get negative 12 plus or minus 2 comes out, that's the square root of 4, times the square root of 11, all of that over 2. Now I want to reduce the fraction, so that means I'm going to divide everything by 2. So 2 divided by 2 here is 1. 12 divided by 2 is 6. 2 divided by 2 is 1. So now there's just 1 in the denominator, so my final answer, x equals negative 6 plus the square root of 11. So I don't have a fraction on that one. When I reduced, it became 1. So my final answer up here in my little box, negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 11. And I should have had a plus or minus at the bottom there. Okay. That is the end of 5-5.